Welcome, and congratulations. I am delighted that you could make it. Getting here wasn't easy, I know. In fact, I suspect it was a little tougher than you realize. To begin with, for you to be here now, trillions of drifting atoms had somehow to assemble in an intricate and curiously obliging manner to create you. It's an arrangement so specialized and particular that it has never been tried before and will only exist this once. For the next many years, we hope, these tiny particles will uncomplainingly engage in all the billions of deft, cooperative efforts necessary to keep you intact, and let you experience the supremely agreeable, but generally underappreciated state known as existence. Why atoms take this trouble is a bit of a puzzle. Being you is not a gratifying experience at the atomic level. For all their devoted attention, your atoms don't actually care about you. Indeed, don't even know that you are there. They don't even know that they are there. They are mindless particles, after all, and not even themselves alive. It is a slightly arresting notion that if you were to pick yourself apart with tweezers, one atom at a time, you would produce a mound of fine atomic dust, none of which had ever been alive, but all of which had once been you. Yet somehow for the period of your existence they will answer to a single rigid impulse, to keep you, you. The bad news is that atoms are fickle, and their time of devotion is fleeting. Fleeting indeed. Even a long human life adds up to only about 650,000 hours, and when that modest milestone flashes into view, or at some other point thereabouts, for reasons unknown, your atoms will close you down, then silently disassemble and go off to be other things. And that's it for you. Still, you may rejoice that it happens at all. Generally speaking, in the universe, it doesn't, so far as we can tell. This is decidedly odd, because the atoms that so liberally and congenially flock together to form living things on Earth are exactly the same atoms that decline to do it elsewhere. Whatever else it may be, at the level of chemistry, life is fantastically mundane. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, a little calcium, a dash of sulfur, a light dusting of other very ordinary elements, nothing you wouldn't find in any ordinary pharmacy, and that's all you need. The only thing special about the atoms that make you is that they make you. That is, of course, the miracle of life.
Violation of Palestinian human rights for investment in supporting global land trade.
It's not that some people are just too dumb to understand it. I mean, that's complete nonsense, right? It can be taught to anyone. It is intuitive to some degree, and it's not like an intelligence thing.
And, we had some placards, one of them which said the pretty factual point that Zionism is racism.
It's not just a moral stand, it's a political stand. What you're talking about is the role that Israel plays securing the interests of US and British imperialism in the Middle East.
And I would be talking about Iraq or Afghanistan or something today where I am, and I understand these conflicts that have literally been going on since I was born. It's just horrifying.
It's not British culture, it's just the world's culture. They love stories, they love this idea that there is this nation that looks like this. I think it's a distraction from the class struggle, to be honest.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Revolutionary Lumpen Radio. I am your co-host Ryan, also known as the Zen Marxist. Here with me is Shibby, also known as Shibby.
What's poppin'?
And today we have the one, the only, the honourable Breht O'Shea from the Revolutionary Left Radio, and we are very happy to have this guest and very excited to have him here.
Yeah, same, because what other Marxists can we talk about? The cosmos, Rev Left, fauna, flora, life, consciousness, psychedelics, ego, solidarity, death, neuroscience, quantum physics, space, and NASA's planned mission in 2024 to go to the moon and beyond to put man and woman on Mars. So if you want HD footage of all of that good stuff, it's coming up. But first and foremost, let's just shout out to our patrons, Jake, Joe, Rev Left Radio, and Victor. Thank you so much for your support. It goes a long way, as Mark said. Money has a social value. I mean, obviously, if we had £1 million off Patreon, that would validate everything we're saying. But, you know, everything you... I'm not saying we'll get to £1 million, but everything you do contribute does help a lot. It helps us obviously survive because we live under capitalism. But yeah, without further ado, let's just dive into it with my mate B-Dog, Breht O'Shea from Rev Left Radio. Welcome to Revolutionary Lumpen Radio, Brett. We're so happy to have you on here to discuss all of the themes that I've just mentioned. And to our listeners, yeah, we were so excited that I even had to redo some of what I said because I was a mumbling mess, and I was like, I couldn't even speak it. Like, I was almost speechless when it came to like the interview because I was actually interviewing Breht O'Shea. Can you imagine? Well, I mean, dreams can come true. That's materialism. If we had the goddamn people power. But yeah, anyway, I'm rambling already, and I'm looking at editing this out, but then I'll be doing this forever, just speaking to myself into a microphone. But yeah, Brett, what is Revolutionary Left Radio? What's the purpose? What's the point? This is also a question that the Lumpen community has also asked me. They don't understand why the hell I'm doing a podcast, and let alone a Marxist podcast. You know, it's obviously to spread class consciousness and whatnot, but what was your reason? And hopefully we can draw out the reason for Revolutionary Lumpen Radio, you know, in kind of the same question and answer. What's the point?
Okay. Yeah, and I do want to get back to what we were just discussing because I think there's some really interesting overlap between, you know, Marxist communism, Buddhism, and physics when it comes to thinking about the cosmos and the world and our place in it. So I'm sure we'll get to that eventually, and I have a bunch to say on that. But just to start off with a discussion about Rev Left Radio, it really organically arose out of organizing here in the Great Plains of the United States after Trump got elected, and there was a lot of uncertainty. There was a rise of just explicit fascism in a way that we haven't seen here in the U.S. for a while. I mean, fascism is always present, especially for Black and Indigenous communities, but the sort of explicit nature with which it arose during and after and still to this day surrounding the Trump campaign was very concerning. And so a bunch of people in my community came together, and we were like, we need to really start organizing. We need to take care of people. We need to protect each other. And if this fascist uprising is really going to continue to play out, we need to be able to defend one another and take defense seriously. And we also at that time had a couple neo-Nazis in our city who were becoming more they were just coming out of the woodwork. They were showing their face they were making YouTube channels. They had presences on campus and stuff. And so our first act as an organization was to collect information about these Nazis and then get it out to the community. And we did this flyer campaign where we basically maybe tens of thousands, if not, multiple thousands of flyers, and we put them all over the city, including on these fascists' front doorsteps and all their neighbors' front doorsteps, calling them out, etc. And after that, we said, the Nazis went back into hiding. They took down their YouTube channel. They even left the city. So that was a success. But we had to keep up the momentum. And one of the things we realized very quickly is that you can't have effective organizing without political education. There has to be something that people who are generally interested in perhaps anti-capitalism or anti-fascism, there needs to be something that can sort of, suss out those ideas and help people think through the implications of what it means to be anti-capitalist and anti-fascism. And so Rev Left Radio, really grew out of that. That was the second need of our organizing, and it came very quickly after our formation. And so I said, I have this shitty bachelor's degree in philosophy, and although it gives me nothing but student debt, one thing it did give me was the ability to think and talk very clearly about complex ideas. And so, they were like, yeah, Brett, you take over the political education wing of our organization, and that morphed in to Rev Left Radio. And it really is just, and still to this day, is about political education. And, you know, Fred Hampton, a Black Panther revolutionary who was killed in 1968 in Chicago, he was very adamant about this, and it's what made him such an effective organizer. He spoke the language of the people in his community. He wasn't an elitist, he wasn't rich, he lived with and among the people.
We're going to have to start practicing, and that's very hard. We got to start getting out there with the people. And a lot of times we think we're better than the people. That's the insult, and that's criminal. It's going to take a lot of hard work.
He understood the need to educate himself first and then turn around and help others get educated, because he knew that revolutionary energy can really go nowhere, or at least has a very severe limit if it's not undergirded by political education, by the understanding of what we're fighting against, what we're fighting for, and what happens when we rise up and try to fight this system. So for all those reasons and more, Rev Left got started, and then it was originally meant just to be a local thing. It was like, you know, here in Omaha and maybe some of the surrounding cities, you know, this will be something that we can help organize our sort of cadre and whatnot. But it just took off in a way that we never expected and became national and then international in its scope. So something about it caught on, and I still can't fully figure out what it is, but I'm just humbled by it, and I realize that I have a deep responsibility now that my platform has gotten to a size where so many people do listen, a deep responsibility to, you know, cross my T's and dot my I's, if you will, and do as much work as I can on my end to really stay as principled as I can and never steer anyone wrong. That's my big fear, is like, you know, maybe my ignorance will steer somebody wrong. And so I'm constantly trying to, you know, educate myself in the process of educating others, and always staying humble about it, you know, realizing that I'm not handing down wisdom, I'm learning along with my comrades the world over. And I think that's also a huge attraction, because people don't feel like they're being lectured at, they feel like they're in on the conversation and learning along with me. And so yeah, that's what Rev Left is, and I'm just sort of honored that it's gotten as big as it has.
Boss introduction there, Breht. Really interesting backstory about how together, you know, you and your organisation was able to push fascists out of your area through anti-fascist activity, you know, letting Nazis know that they're not welcome in your area and having them actually leave is, I mean, a best case scenario when it comes to having Nazis in your town, so well done for that. I can also see how you were asked to host Rev Left, how that went from a small communal tool for political education to an international one. I've never seen your Libsyn stats, but I can presume that you've pretty much seen or listened to, you know, internationally, and yet there's many reasons for this. I'm sure it is your humility, it is your ability to articulate yourself and other ideas and translate, you know, theories and concepts from political texts that are from maybe 100, 200 years ago, and use like excellent examples that everybody can relate to in the modern era. Also like to shout out to the astonishing Alice, your co-host on Red Menace, who does excellent work in this manner also. And I'll like to shout out to Dave as well, your sound engineer. I don't think he gets as much credit as he deserves, so there's that. Yeah, really interesting history there, but you know, when it comes to that political education, I think I'm probably the least educated person you've ever spoken to on a podcast ever. So yeah, it comes down to, you know, why you're such an awesome, cool host and a cool guy. Yeah, it's also really interesting how somebody can just listen to a podcast and also hear you develop. Also, it's kind of a story on top of a story. Ryan?
I think it's important to just say that, like, you know, whether you're credentialed or not isn't really important, right? Like the idea that, you know, we should only listen or take information from people who are credentialed or who come from, you know, those kind of institutions isn't really important, right? You can, I think Lenin taught Marxism to people who couldn't read and write, you know, so the idea that, you know, you have to be credentialed in order to be listened to, or, you know, it's not a great idea, I don't think.
Yeah, in fact, I try to put that into practice by, I do have a fair share of academics. There are revolutionary academics that have something to say, and, there's also this idea that, they have something to teach us, but a big part of my show and a big chunk of my guests are just regular people that, start off as listeners of the show, reach out to me through Patreon, develop something like an online relationship, and then I say, hey, do you want to study this topic and read this book and then come on and talk about this thing with me? And they say, yeah. And I started doing that as a conscious effort to get away from some of the, the petty bourgeois obsession with academia, and knowing full well that the people that I come from, the people in my neighborhood, the people that, raised me, they don't really speak the language of academia. There's something to be offered for sure, but, it can get exhausting if all you do is hear the NPR-like tones of academics, talking in jargon that you only half understand. And so getting real people to come on the show, regular working class people, giving them a little task, like maybe read this book or do some research over the next month or two on this topic, and then we can have a discussion. It's turned out really well. People shine. I mean, I've never had a guest that's let me down. And, most of them are just regular working people that are servers in the industry, or like, struggling students, or whatever it may be. Coming on and shining in that way has been something that's beautiful and shown me the capacity of regular working people to have these conversations. We don't need different, people from different classes coming and telling us about stuff. We can do it ourselves. We can investigate ourselves, and I think that's a powerful thing as well. And your show highlights that as well. And so I think there's that connection between our two shows, definitely.
This is literally exactly what I'm trying to tell people. I'm trying to tell people with no education who do struggle to grasp, the words used in political theory from these old historical texts. This is exactly what I'm trying to tell people. I'm trying to tell people who do struggle to grasp the words used in these political theory texts. These are the same people who have went to shitty comprehensive schools that have been underfunded from austerity. The same people who probably never read anything beyond the text on a video game on the screen, or the text on the phone from a social media app, that you can come out, be a goddamn communist. There's people who are going to explain this theory to you. There's people who are going to be able to help you articulate your own thoughts and feelings and use that to empower yourself and others who are part of a goddamn struggle here. So these same people who've spent their whole life on a dole or having to hustle for a living, knowing only the slang relating to the Lumpen thug life or the language from their city's culture, like, they need to know that there's a world of comrades out here to support them, to help educate them, so we can turn the knowledge of individual power into people power. I mean, there's a whole world of people. I mean, you think you've got loads of mates, think of how many mates you're gonna have when you're goddamn comrade. But I'm speaking to Breht O'Shea, so it's a goddamn evidence. Everything I'm saying it, proof, it's right there. Just fuck me, there's no amount of festivals that can justify the desperate lives that we have to live and struggle under just to eat another day. There's a better world and we have to make it together. Ryan, what's your level of education like? Just out of curiosity. You've done psychology, haven't you?
Not at a university level. I mean, my degree's in cybersecurity management, but I mean, I'm interested in these things, like sociology, psychology, philosophy. Like, I learn about those things generally because, like you say, everyone has internet access these days, so anyone can pick up any book at any time and learn about anything. So,
yeah, true. Even if you haven't got the time to pick up a book and read whatever to learn, you can still just plug in some headphones and listen to some Red Menace or Rev Left and listen to that over whatever it is that you're forced to do to make money to survive. Awesome. So with the introductions over, we can now dive into a response to the audio clip played at the start of the pod, describing, tiny atoms in the great expanse that is the cosmos. What is the cosmos? Why have humans stared up at it, at the stars, and wondering just how is it connected to us spiritually? What does this say for the nature of our reality and how we should behave whilst being a conscious product of the cosmos? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Breht.
For sure, yeah. When I was listening to that recording, or just any sort of understanding of how the cosmos operates, something is overlapping between something like Buddhism, something like Marxism, something like physics, and that is this idea of dialectics, which can be a vague term, and a lot of times it's kind of hard to pin down exactly what we mean by dialectics. But something at the core of all these philosophies is that they're inherently in the universe, there's no separation between things. Humans like to categorize discrete objects in the world and put them in these little categories. That's a tree, that's a rock, that's a person, that's a cloud, right? And obviously it makes evolutionary sense for us to be able to discern between different objects, and our brains were obviously molded by evolution. But something that we lose sight of is that, inherently everything is a web of life. Everything is deeply interconnected. And on the level of physics, whether you're talking about general sort of relativity or you're talking about like the weird world of quantum mechanics, both of those iterations of physics get at the idea that there actually is no separation. You can think of things like spooky action at a distance or whatever, or just how the planets interact gravitationally with one another. Things cannot be separated, and that goes also for philosophies. You were talking earlier, Shibby, about communists, and we have more to say about the world and life than just politics. And a big reason for that is because everything is interconnected. You can't talk about outward political fights without talking about, say, the inner psychology of the people engaged in those fights, or the environmental arena from which those life forms, us, our minds, bubble up out of. We have this idea, whether it's from our Christian tradition in the West or whatever, that we somehow come into the universe, that, there's a God that exists outside the universe and we get placed in it from the outside. And even when we've, sort of shooken off the shackles of that explicit religious thinking, it still sort of infiltrates at a subconscious level how we think about the world, that, I'm separate from that other person. That person's liberation struggle over in the Philippines has nothing to do with my struggle here in the US or in the UK, and that can be a very nefarious and obviously even bourgeois way of thinking about the world, hyper individualistic, if you will. And so just to come to these conversations with the deep understanding that everything is interconnected, everything is interdependent, the separateness is a fundamental illusion, and to be aware of that is the first step in sort of overcoming that illusion of separateness. And once you do that, on the political realm, you begin to realize that your freedom, your liberty, your happiness even, is inexorably tied up with everybody else's. And that gives rise to ideas like nobody is free until we're all free. Internationalism. Your struggle in the UK is one with my struggle here in the US, is one with the struggle of Palestinians in the Mideast, etc. And that can be a very powerful way of looking at the world on all levels, but particularly political. And I think it's communists as opposed to fascists or liberals or conservatives or any other political formation that takes that idea of interconnectedness as seriously as it should be taken. And that is why solidarity is so important to us, while it's not important to other political formations.
Yeah, I mean, that's always why I've seen Marxism as sort of superior to all other ideologies, because there is actually a proper philosophical foundation to this entire thing. It's a holistic way of viewing the world. And I mean, when you view other ideologies, you don't see that. It isn't there. It isn't grounded and rooted in a sort of in a proper philosophical base that permeates the entire ideology.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. This is going to be a good episode. So yeah, these phrases are such a web of life, bubble up out of the earth. I love that, because we all stemmed from one point in time. Like, our distant ancestor is the Big Bang. It's that meteorite and that comet that come together just as you got them sperm hit your mother's egg. All of these things are so rare, so astronomically rare, but they are literally materials coming together to bubble up out of the earth together. And it's interesting, that phrase, because so much of us is water. It's electricity that's hit the earth from lightning, I imagine, from this static that's grown up of other things just coming together. You know, it's marvelous. And yet, just as Ryan said, it's so important to use Marxism as our base of ideology. You know, we use historical materialism to describe these phenomena. You know, this simply put, that's just to prove to us, even though we can see it with our own eyes, but there's people who are naive out there and think that capitalism is the only thing that's ever been and never will be. But, you know, we know that this is true just from the simple fact that both a seed and the plant comes from the other, and none of them exist within the same space of time separately. Yeah, it's dialectical. So, another interesting thing there, you mentioned spooky science, quantum physics, you know, regarding quantum entanglement. And I just really want to share my own theory on this from, you know, my life's observation. Right, look, right. The bourgeoisie have got that much power. So the way that we use our minds to basically describe how we create the world, like it's our brains that affect the world, and then we can materialise houses up out of our imagination. The bourgeoisie have had that much power. They've shaped the entire world. The entire world may essentially be like a motherboard, and I'll explain why. Because you could see like the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, being the power supply. They're the ones given power to this motherboard, and you could see like Hollywood being the graphics processor. You can see like the army and military being the RAM. You could see like the schools and education system being the processor. So all of these things, as well as private property, shape the motherboard. And like just an example, like we are the electrons. We are literally forms of energy in this goddamn bag of flesh, and we can only go where our capitalists want us to go, through the motherboard. So a way I link this into quantum entanglement is like that bourgeoisie has trained somebody to be a McDonald's worker in the United States, and then somebody in the UK is doing the exact same thing. You know, how many people are playing Call of Duty? EA or whoever has made that game, they know that people are gonna move the controls in that same buttons in the same way that that bourgeoisie knows that the person in the US is gonna flip burgers the exact same way in the UK. So whether we like it or not, we're literally behave like on a neural level. The signals from our brain to move our arm in such a way, or to move our thumbs and fingers on a joystick the exact same way, is happening all around the world. So I mean, we're literally copying each other, but copying that state of consciousness, that these neurons firing, that this bourgeoisie has, you know, basically done in order to profit with us. So we don't have freedom in the same way that Mark Zuckerberg knows that if he sends us this notification using dopamine and whatnot, we're going to do the exact same thing as loads of other people. So quantum entanglement happens on an astronomical cosmos scale, but it also happens on a smaller individual level in our brain. And, you know, call me a madman for having these theories, but there's going to be a lot more of these similar theories coming up. But, you know, these companies and businesses use neuroscience and quantum physics in order to become better people in businesses, and to make us more susceptible to basically what they want. So our freedoms are limited, and we as Marxists don't really talk about you know, quantum physics or you know neuroscience. When I don't see why not, because we're affected by dopamine and all that. So you know, let's just look at how it makes us behave. But going back to the motherboard, like, I know this from my parkour days, that say we are the electrons that the power module is sending by, because they control obviously who's born, who's not born. If they wanted, they could obviously just say, yeah, nobody's allowed to be born, or they could, you know, do as they do in the United States and have like, you know, money tied in with birth. So you're only gonna do that if obviously you can pay for a baby and whatnot, and you know, that's a whole different kettle of fish. But the point being is, like, we as electrons are destined to come from one place, and we move through this motherboard known as the capitalist world in such a preordained way. Like, we know we're going to be born, we're going to have to go to school, we're going to have to work in a certain kind of workplace, and then we all know that we're going to die and go into a certain hole in the ground. You can't ever stray away from that. And I know this from my parkour days, because if we did ever stray away from where our electrons, where our bodies and our life force are supposed to go, then the police will come after us because we're straying onto private property. So, yeah, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's two things that I thought of when you were talking, and you're talking about the motherboard, and like, you know, Alan Watts, he talks about this idea of like, if aliens came to Earth and the first thing they would see from a distance, right, is, you know, on the dark side of the planet, as the planet moved towards nighttime, all these lights come on, and as you said, this interwoven circuitry, and you know, the cars driving into the cities in the morning and then out to the suburbs or to the rural areas at night or whatever. And from that perspective, it radically transforms the way that you think about human civilization as this one interconnected node, and the individuals are, you know, to go to your neuroscientific analogy, independent neurons, but they're all deeply connected, and that neuron individually depends on the entire network for its existence and its efficacy. But, you know, and then also Carl Sagan, right? He talked about the pale blue dot. Same sort of perspectal shift of zooming way out and looking and seeing that everything is inherently unified. But you're right, when you're on the ground, especially under the sway of bourgeois ideology, everybody is an individual. Everybody has to make their own way. You're not going to get much help. Go out and do your shit. And if you fail, it's your fault. A division of labor, right? We're not workers coming together to democratically plan the way that we create and produce and distribute the means of life, but rather we have an overlord that tells us your one specific task is to, you know, flip the burger, and your one task is to cash out the customer, and all that money that you're generating, you'll get a couple cents, but I'm gonna usurp that as my profit. Because we live that way for so long, we begin to understand our own lives on those terms, our own lives on the individualistic basis, and whether a deep love of science or a practice of meditation or even a use of psychedelics can be the thing that can push you out of that individualism, and even Marxism, right? All these are mechanisms by which we shift that perception away from bourgeois individualism and hyperdivision towards something closer to connection and interdependence. And so, yeah, that can be incredibly powerful, and Marxism fits perfectly well in that perspective shift.
Yeah, interesting. Alan Watts sounds like an interesting guy, and not lastly because his name's Watts and he's talking so much about electricity, but it's also good to be reassured that there's people out there thinking the same kind of thoughts as me regarding these existential ideas. But it just reinforces the fact that that's how it is. We don't have freedom. We're literally just batteries born to serve the bourgeoisie since birth. And just something that pisses me off is like, for months all these companies and businesses have had the lights on during the corona pandemic. Like, they know for a fact that they're going to be closed, but these lights that are there not just to shape where we can and can't go, but these lights are constantly shown on us. So we're seeing like KFC in big lights. They know that they're going to be closed for the last like 4 months, but they've still got all the lights on, in store, out of store, and it's just like that's just like going off on one. But it's something that's just really pissed me off that I can't help that notice. But when we talk about these lights, from an outside perspective, from businesses and corporations, like, you're going to be closed, just turn the goddamn lights off. You're wasting electricity.
And it's also a form of psychological harassment. We'll never turn the lights off. Everywhere you look is an advertisement for something. Buy.
Yeah, that's definitely psychological harassment. And you did touch upon, breaking out of this psychological paradigm that the bourgeoisie keep you trapped in, and referring to meditation, hallucinogenics. Buddhism and whatnot. We will go into those subjects, but firstly let's just talk about the other life forms on the planet that don't have voices so much. So we'll look at plants, we'll look at animals. I just firstly give some interesting facts about plants that I don't think people actually truly understand, in order to help obviously people grasp plants, because of course they are what keep us alive. We are made out of them, but they don't understand just how beneficial they are to humans in general. So what existed before the bourgeoisie shaped the world around us so that we're just mere components, mere nodes of electricity in order to fulfill whatever they want on their operating system, where they control the mouse in the operating system that they know as capitalism. There was nature. And what is nature? Nature is the master of craftsman of molecules. It created an almost inexhaustible array of molecular entities. It stands as an infinite resource for drug development. Novel chemotypes and pharmacophores and scaffolds for amplification into efficacious drugs for a multitude of disease indications and other valuable bioactive agents. Since time immemorial, natural products have been the backbone of traditional system of healing throughout the globe, and have also been an integral part of history and culture. Although the use of bioactive products as herbal drug preparations dates back hundreds, even thousands of years ago, their application as isolated and characterized compounds to modern drug discovery and development started only in the 19th century. It has been well documented that natural products played critical roles in modern drug development, especially for antibacterial and anti-tumor agents. Even though popularity of the synthetic products increased due to its production cost, time effectiveness, easy quality control, stringent regulation and quick effects, but their safety and efficiency always remain questionable, resulting in the dependence on the natural products by more than 80% of the total population in the developing world because of its time-tested safety and efficiency. So it's basically saying, yeah, these pharmaceuticals, big pharma, they're not making nothing like nature makes for the developing world, who benefit a lot more from just natural products. A huge number of natural product derived compounds in various stages of clinical development highlighted the existing viability and significance of the use of natural products as sources of new drug candidates. But what are these new drug candidates? What are the old drug candidates? How are these things healing us? Well, let's just look at just a few examples of these natural products that are used in modern medicine today, because I don't think that a lot of people actually truly grasp how much medicine comes from just plants. I'm sure everybody here is going to be aware of caffeine. Caffeine's used to treat fatigue and migraines. You find caffeine in coffee beans, tea leaves, cocoa pods, koala nuts and garlic, but you also know it in pretty much paracetamol. You'll always find some caffeine in there because again it's used to treat migraines. Aspirin, again similar, it's used for pain relief and anti-clotting. The salix in which it's used is found in a willow bark. So aspirin, the main components within it that cures your headache and blood clots is a willow bark. It's a goddamn bark of a tree. Who would have known? Cocaine, it's used for anesthesia and as a recreational drug. Cocaine is derived from the cocoa plant, but yet again it's used in anesthesia. If you want like a serious like surgery, then you gotta use anesthesia, and again that comes from a plant. Digitalis, never heard of it. The leaves on it are used to treat erythema. It's derived from foxglove, if you've heard of that plant. Morphine, codeine, opium. Codeine's like a strong tablet that you use for like headaches, migraines, pain relief. Morphine again is used in serious conditions. If you've ever been shot at on a war zone, you've probably had morphine to numb the pain or anything like that. So yeah, you've got this codeine, this opium plant to help you. So these are just a few examples, but my point being, how many of these are being annihilated by Monsanto? How many cures for cancer are out there that are now soybean farms for Monsanto? How many of these plants could heal us in ways that we can't even imagine, but have been annihilated through capitalism and they're just extinction of these plants? Any thoughts on that, Brett?
Yeah, I would even add one more. I don't know if you mentioned this. I don't think I heard it. But ergot, the basis of LSD, we think of LSD as being synthesized in a chemistry lab, but the fundamental core of it is ergot, which is a sort of fungus that grows on grain and wheat, as an interesting aside. But yeah, your overall point is incredibly well taken, and I think it fits perfectly into the broader ideas that we've been discussing of interconnectedness, because instead of that sort of theological idea that we're from outside of the cosmos or the earth and placed onto it, the truth is, scientifically, is that we bubble up out of the earth. The earth is a sort of womb. It creates the conditions by which all manner of fauna and flora can burst forth and emerge out of it, and we are not separate from that. And all life on earth has a common ancestor, right? Billions of years ago. And so that means that everything on Earth, animals, plants, everything, is deeply genetically, scientifically related to one another. I think we share up to 30% of our DNA with like dandelions, for example. Not to say anything of all the animals that we share huge chunks of our DNA. Chimpanzees, over 98% of our DNA. And so we can see how all flora and fauna co-evolved on Earth. And so it would make sense that human beings and our brains are receptive to a cacophony of different plants and how they interact with our brains. Cannabis, for example, it acts on our endocannabinoid system, right? So like our brains already have receptors in them that are perfectly matched to the cannabinoids that come out of the cannabis plant. So on all these levels, it's really incredibly fascinating. And what Big Pharma does is it takes, it isolates, it creates, it patents, and then it profits off of these things that at the core of them are shared property, right? They're common to all of us because they come up out of the earth along with us. And so what they do is they build fences around these things. Well, this is ours, and if you want it now for your headache or whatever, you're going to have to pay us money. And that's just another way in which the capitalist class is deeply parasitic. One thing that I do on my off time when I'm not doing politics or taking care of my family is I always constantly am obsessed with going out into nature and engaging with it and being with it. Lately, I've had this deep obsession with fishing. So literally almost every single day I go out for hours by myself to pretty like isolated hidden lakes, and I just fish them. And when I catch a big bass or something, I'm very careful with it. I respect it. I take it out of the water. I marvel at its beauty, and I set it back in the water and let it go back and continue to live its life. And that process is just one way, I think, that humans who struggle with isolation from nature, alienation from nature, can proactively work in their own lives to disentangle themselves from that web of alienation and to go out and be in an ecosystem, preferably alone, right? Like in the silence of nature. And if you're out there for a long time, whether that's fishing, hunting, hiking, camping, anything, what you begin to do is you begin to embed yourself within the beautiful patterns of nature. And it is deeply healing on an existential level just to be out in nature and to have that greenery all over and to hear the sounds and the insects and the splashes in the water and to see, like, when I was fishing yesterday, I go night fishing, and I went night fishing by myself. And so I'm out in this like sort of hilly wooded area, completely isolated, 2 miles miles away from a main road, and nobody else is around, and the sun has already set, the moon is out ahead of me, and I'm fishing, and this little beaver, right, comes like this 2 feet in front of me off the shore, and I just stop fishing for a moment. I let my line go down so that this little beaver can swim over it, and I just look at the beautiful pattern of water that is the wake that created by this little beaver's, maneuvers. And it has like some grass or some twigs in its mouth that it's clearly taking over to its dam to continue to build it or whatever. And I really just think that we can't overestimate and can't overstate how important it is to physically and purposefully put yourself into these ecosystems and see how they move, how they machinate. And that can be deeply healing, but also deeply instructive. And it can work against some of that hardcore alienation from nature, which I think a significant chunk of the anxiety and depression and neuroses of our species in the modern world is really derived from, right? Is this isolation not only from one another and from the product of the things that we do, our life activity, but also our alienation from nature. So any way that you can proactively fight against that and raise your children, help your friends get out in nature, I think you're doing really important work, really.
Absolutely. I also think it's really important to note that like moments like that are also teaching moments as to why, corporate ownership of such things is unacceptable, right? So like if you take your example of solo fishing at night in the woods and then compare that to sort of the mass industrial scale dredge net trawling of industrial fishing, you can pull on your own experience to understand why the industrialization of such a thing isn't good for or even sustainable,
right?
Yeah, that's why that alienation's important, isn't it? Because that enables your capacity to like mass slaughter entire ecosystems without batting an eye, despite needing them, because obviously you can't eat money.
Yeah, exactly. And to that exact point, well, really quick, I want to touch on Ryan's point about fishing and counter juxtaposing that to big ag and just the factory farming, etc. I don't know how it works in the UK, but here in the US, if you want to go fishing, you have to buy a fishing license, and that fishing license comes with a bunch of regulations for how you can treat the animals, and it's all about game management or making sure that the populations stay healthy. And the main funding mechanism to keep those fish populations or game populations healthy is through the funds raised through buying licenses. So, at the same time where I'm going out and fishing, I'm also materially supporting the conservation of these areas, which is another sort of distinction from factory farming, which is just take, and never giving back. But to Shibby's point about just the overall fight, I think about environmentalism and the attack on it by multinational corporations seeking to extract and plunder profit from the natural world. And once you start getting out of your individualistic, alienated mode of thinking and realize that you are one with your entire natural environment, you begin to see the destruction of the natural world as literally a physical attack on your body, on the premise of your and your loved one's very existence. There is no separation. My heart is just as important to my existence as the trees are, right? The oxygen level in the atmosphere is just as important to me existing as is my lungs on the inside of my body. And so when you break down that inside versus outside separation, you begin to see that the premise of we bubble up out of the earth. The premise of our existence is the earth's health and beauty and sustainability. And anybody who seeks to destroy that health and beauty and sustainability in pursuit of profit is an enemy of all sentient beings and literally an attack on your and my bodies. And I think that radical shift can only lead to something like a radical environmentalism, where we're willing to do whatever we can to protect the earth. And when you look specifically in the U.S., a settler colonial nation state, right? The UK gave bloody birth to the U.S., and that settler colonial project is ongoing. The genocide of indigenous peoples is ongoing. But one of the core pillars of that genocide is to rip indigenous people off of the land that they cultivated for thousands of years, that they were one with, that they lived in sustainable harmony with for thousands and thousands of years. years, and then European capitalists come over here, and within 200 years we're on the brink of mass extinction and climate chaos. And that says a lot about the pathology, the psychopathology of capitalism overall.
This is actually such a great bridge to something I wanted to talk to you about, which was Adorno's The Culture Industry, Enlightenment as mass deception. This idea he has that, the Age of Enlightenment brought to humans the idea that we should have dominion over nature instead of, working synergistically with it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that whole idea of dominion over nature, as much as the Enlightenment project sort of pitched itself as fighting against, religious, superstitious thinking, it's a direct descendant of the sort of Christian idea of dominion, that we come from the outside, we're placed here, and then this is our sort of playground to do as we will with it. And so, the Enlightenment sees itself as a revolutionary rupture from superstitious religious thinking, but in so many ways it covers up the core rotten nature of the very idea of dominion and carries it on into the new world and puts capitalism instead of the church at the forefront of that quote unquote dominion. So that pathology is never resolved in the Enlightenment, and the adherents and defenders of the Enlightenment are really adherents and defenders of a rotten, fundamentally broken system of thought and behavior in the world. And the most highfalutin ideas of the Enlightenment are actually directly undermined by how the systems that the Enlightenment produced actually operate in the real world. So, the Enlightenment, people who defend the Enlightenment think of themselves as brave defenders of free speech and democracy and liberty and freedom, but every step of the way, the colonialist and capitalist world project has undermined those very things, if not for every single person, then for 95% of the human beings and flora and fauna on Earth itself. And so a revolutionary rupture from the capitalist colonial system is synonymous with a revolutionary rupture of the Enlightenment paradigm, or at least that part of the paradigm that is unfulfilled. Insofar as we believe in any aspect of the Enlightenment project, a Marxist would see it as a fundamentally unfinished and aborted and betrayed project. And carrying a true enlightenment means being enlightened against these ideas of multinational corporations, of extraction, of plundering, of individualism, etc. So however you relate to the Enlightenment project, whether you're against it or you're for it in theory, the actual systems that it has produced are utterly insufficient and, in fact, existential threats to our entire existence and our future.
Yeah, damn right. It is true enlightenment to recognise all of this and obviously not follow bourgeois understanding of science that's so abstract and only beneficial to, the capitalist economy and capitalist ideology. Just go through a few points there fast. What you said about doing what we can in order to defeat this alienation with nature and get out there in the wild and see these things and, marvel at its beauty, whether that's looking at nature moving through water and being, aesthetically mesmerized by just the natural elements and that which lives within it. I think it's important to recognise what you said about teaching our children to obviously realise this. Well, when I was last out with my son, and he's just marvelling at like ducks and he's marvelling at caterpillars and he's slapping leaves as he's going past, because he's just like he's basically playing with nature and seeing how they move with gravity, seeing the tension within the branches. All of this is absolutely fascinating, but this gets taught out of us when we become consumers. And yeah, regarding fishing, we can do that in the UK. The UK is, of course, heavily infrastructuralized concrete jungle. There really isn't big open plains where we can go out, just like in the US. I mean, even most of our forests are like artificial. It's really insane, but there is the odd farmer's field stashed away with a little pond there which people do go fishing in, and yeah, often you need a license. But yeah, regarding ecosystems and the natural environment, we can see more of that when we go online, for example, I'm seeing videos of elephants taking somebody's hat off and putting it on their head as a joke. I'm seeing a fox working with a baby badger, hunting, working together. I'm seeing humans work with dolphins. Now one of the dolphins are going to give them some food. I'm seeing birds working with humans in Africa, knowing that the humans are going to get rid of the bees in the beehive, which the bird has shown them where it is, knowing that the humans are going to give the bird some honey, and seeing all of this cooperation between different species using a subtle level of communication. And that's really this nature that we're alienated from. And again, when we talk about what is nature, what is natural, well, like, animals eat each other like all the time. I think that one of the worst ways to go would be to be eaten from the legs up by another animal. Yet there are animals all the time that are scurrying in agony because they're being eaten alive. But I guess that is like the circle of life. There's no question there. It's just it's difficult to find a true balance there, and we can all become vegans, but I don't really know how like beneficial that would be. But yeah, that's kind of furthermore reflecting on nature. Although they would be tragic ways to go, we can also die from smoking, we can die from being hit by a car, we can die in our work quite easily. I mean, we'll likely die from global warming burning us up, the nuclear sword hanging over our heads. But yeah, it's true that like animals have to eat each other to survive. But and even just to reflect on like what Marx Aurelius said when he can't go back to the spinning wheel. Obviously, technology has to go forward. We have to meet foods like the world's population food demands. So I completely get that, obviously. But like when I'm working at KFC and I'm seeing like chickens come from like Brazil, Germany, France, Australia, New Zealand. And then all of these chickens are being raised on food, water, being shipped on a cargo container to come over to the UK, be unloaded, be transported to Liverpool, and then literally, if they don't get sold in 10 minutes after being cooked using energy, they go straight in the bin. So, you know what I'm saying? There's got to be better ways. What are we doing with the food? So here's a solution for you, because I drink what calls itself a nutritionally complete food. It's made with pea protein, flaxseed, coconuts, brown rice. I drink 5 of them like a day. It gives me 100% of recommended daily amount of calories, vitamins, minerals, high in protein. You get slow release carbs, you get all your essential fats, you get a source of fibre, you get all your phytonutrients, you get everything the body needs 100%. You can get it in powder form or you can get it in a liquid form. The state should roll this out everywhere to every single household, everywhere. Again, the people themselves can build this in their local communities. It gives them jobs. We can obviously build the plants to build all the chemicals and the vitamins and minerals. Again, we develop professors, we develop scientists, we develop people in all local communities. So all of this is one way in which we can detach ourselves from capitalist food consumption and also advance into a next stage of actually getting high nutrition foods to the people. So yeah, I went off on one there, but as well as complaining about the modern industrialized food consumption habits, we can always propose solutions, and this is one. It's a lot better than 50% of all the food's waste being raised, transported, and then going in the bin like I've experienced in KFC. So yeah, there is a lot there, but have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just the utter, deep, massive inefficiency of the capitalist system, the very system that loves to pretend that it is the cutting edge of efficiency itself. And just that whole process of raising, spending money and energy to create the chicken, shipping it halfway across the world, and as you said, just throwing it into the trash can is just absolutely absurd, and really highlights the absurdity of the entire system. But I think what you're getting at earlier and deeply is something I struggle with as well, or think about a lot, is we talk about the inseparability of everything and dialectics. Well, there's a dialectic between death and life. Life literally cannot exist without death. There has to be a clearing away of the old in order for there to be a birth and growth of the new. And that happens on every single level, both cosmically, environmentally, personally, right? Like I grow up, I raise my children, I die off so that I can leave room for their children. And there is something sort of beautiful in that cycle. And one of the things that got me into fishing particularly, but even a little bit into hunting, which we can maybe talk about, was the idea of sort of refusing to extract myself from that life and death process. As ugly as it can be, that's only one side of it, right? The bear chewing on the deer while it screams, right, is one aspect of nature. But on the other side is, as you said, two species coming together to help one another. Or you've even seen pictures of some sort of predator with a baby version of their prey, and it actually takes it under its wing and protects it. So these are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other, and it's sort of idealist to assume that you can. And as much as we may want, because of our moral compunction or whatever, to extract death from the life and death cycle, it's really unhealthy, because what you actually get in lieu of actually being able to separate life and death is you just get a pushing away of it out of view. So the death and the carnage and the torture and the bloodshed still happen, but it's just conveniently pushed way out of view, and then you can walk around feeling a little bit superior because you don't see how you're directly engaging with that bloodshed that is, the fundamental basis of all nature. And when you look at that, and I think when you look at big agriculture, factory farming, and the absolute depravities and torturous cruelty of those systems, you can go one of two ways. I think the vegan route is one reaction to the horror show of factory farming, and it's an admirable, wonderful reaction, I think, and it's something that, it takes a lot of discipline, and I respect anybody who does it. I think on the other end, though, and sometimes it doesn't get talked about enough, one of the other reactions you can have in the face of that depravity is to say, I want to go out and harvest my food from the natural world. I want to go out and fish and hunt for my food as much as I can to displace the otherwise factory farmed meat that I would be taking in. And so I think hunters and vegans, although they're sort of presented to us as complete and utter opposites with nothing in common, and they often slander one another, across the firing line, in reality are often motivated by very similar impulses in the face of the depravities of this system. And, you can have your moral compunctions against of hunting, but I think even if veganism were to be completely widely accepted, all the land that would need to be cleared. I mean, it's cleared already for meat, right? But I'm just trying to get to this point that you can't actually separate death from the process. So even in a vegan world, where you have agriculture as the main dominant way people feed themselves, you're still clearing land, you're still killing rodents and insects, you're still, maybe using organic pesticides or whatever fertilizers for the crops to grow. And so you can't, as much as you wriggle and writhe, you can't extract yourself from this life and death process. So for me, fishing and hunting are ways in which I'm trying to deal with that contradiction, and maybe I'm not doing it right. Maybe there are arguments against hunting that would put me to shame or whatever, but it at least is that shared impulse I have with vegans of how can I not partake at least less and less in this horrific system, and how can I be as self-sufficient as possible? Growing gardens, going out once in a while to fish, to feed your family, going out and be able to hunt, so that animal, instead of being pumped full of artificial hormones and antibiotics, living a torturous life shoulder to shoulder with other of its species, and then being slaughtered unceremoniously at the end, actually lives a full life out in nature. Breeds, grows old, and then you go out and you harvest that animal, bring it back, feed your family with it. Well, I know that neither veganism nor hunting could really be widespread, right? Like not every person on earth could do both those things. It wouldn't be sustainable, and that's where scientific development and technological development need to come in, right? We can't go back to some past. But at the same time, I don't know. I'm just throwing those sort of out on the table, and would love to hear both of your responses to that sort of contradiction or conflict between veganism and hunting.
No, I love both of those things, and I think it's definitely important that, as many people as possible do those two things, but also not lose sight of, the sort of structural problems that prevail, right? Like, even if we manage to get, I don't know, 30, 40, 50% of the planet to become vegans, that's still not going to, change the fact that, Dow Chemical still pollutes rivers and oceans and everything, right? And I think that there is a sort of inherent problem in the individualization of correcting those issues, right? The idea that if everyone's vegan, then we can reverse climate change, except there are, companies, corporations, structures that will still carry on doing things the way they are, even if they have to morph and change slightly to accommodate an ever, increasing vegan population. I mean, the largest polluter on the planet is, the US military. So there's no level of veganism that would prevent them doing what they do,
Absolutely.
Yeah, so when you were talking about veganism, the first thing that popped into my mind was discipline, and you did mention that. It's absolutely remarkable and commendable, vegans, and it is so well said, Brett, when you were talking about how vegans and these natural hunters do have so much natural understanding in mind, despite there being methods being different. There's so much nuance in that. Again, I do think in my ideal communist world, if I was the leader, I would have the industrialized nations that preserve how they are, and then instead of building outwards, we just build up. It's that simple. Just build towers, and then everywhere that is natural, if humans did want to inhabit those lands, that it is natural, and it does have natural ecosystems, I do think that they should only be allowed in those places to live with spears. You know what I'm saying? Because they're forced to survive by themselves. If they get eaten by a wild animal, then that's just life. But I think that's a way to have a natural subsistence hunter lifestyle, whilst also being ethically moral or more natural or something. I mean, that's something I thought about anyway. But when you were talking about life and death, this being a dialectic, and you need one for the other, that's so true. And we can see this every time we breathe, because inhaling oxygen is why we breathe, but inhaling oxygen is actually what ages our cells. We obviously breathe out carbon dioxide, so we're in this permanent rapport with all different life forms that produce oxygen. But again, this is why antioxidants are important for our health, because they combat the oxygen that we breathe in, so that our cells age at a slower rate. And these antioxidants can be found in, blueberries and other things. So, that just shows this dialectic between life and death, and we can just see every time we take a breath. So, we're moving on to the more trippy aspects of reality now. So let's discuss psychedelics, because you mentioned it on one of your Patreon episodes that you were inspired to do your Nina Simone episode, excellent by the way, after a trip with mushrooms. So I really wonder, what was it about those mushrooms that really resonated with you? Was Nina Simone and her love of humanity, her passion and her drive for a oneness, something that the mushroom felt? Is it something, did it give off a language to you that made you realise this? Did it say something to you? Is that mushroom really dead? If that's the case, did it speak to you in a way that has now become part of your consciousness? Is that mushroom dead now, or is it a part of you? Just some thoughts, some questions.
Well, yeah, they do live on in the sense that they impact our consciousness in ways that are truly profound and almost inexplicable. And I think the reason that this conversation particularly can get very difficult and highly speculative is because at the core of it, we're talking about human consciousness and how these substances affect human consciousness. And human consciousness itself is a profound and utter mystery. Philosophers have talked about it for hundreds of years. Scientists are trying to understand the neuroscientific and chemical basis of it. But the more we poke and prod, the more it seems to elude us. And so when we're talking about psychedelics, we're talking about something that it affects our brains on, like, you can talk about mushrooms or acid or DMT on the neuroscientific level, on this materialist, how does this actually affect the neurochemistry of the brain level? But on the other level, which is even perhaps the more profound level, is its impact on consciousness and how that impact can be lasting. Now, you can engage with psychedelics in a way that is just sort of flippant, right? I talked about on another episode my flippant engagement when I was younger and I was like 16 and did way too much mushrooms, and it was the motivation behind it was just to get fucked up with my friends, right? And sometimes some spiritual-esque revelations can come through that, but a lot of times it can just be a sort of, I'm just putting these chemicals in my head to make things wavy for a while, and that's fun and cool. But on a deeper level, and as I get older, I understand that there's this other way to engage with psychedelics, which is to take them very seriously, to think of them medicinally, to think of them therapeutically, to set up a context in your mind and literally in the little physical space that you plan on taking these psychedelics, setting them up intentionally with the idea and with the idea of paying respect to what you're about to do, and with the idea that it's not to get fucked up, but rather to introspect, to investigate first-handedly the mystery of your own consciousness. And when you are engaged with those substances, whether they be DMT, LSD, mushrooms, and you engage with them in that respectful, sort of intentional way, they can have profound effects creatively, therapeutically, psychologically, and science is actually now slowly catching up to this idea that there are true benefits, medicinal benefits to these things, whether it's, using MDMA to treat post-traumatic stress syndrome, or ayahuasca to treat heroin and alcohol addiction, or mushrooms, for example, are being used in end-of-life terminal cancer patients to ease anxiety and to have a revelatory experience, whereby most of the subjects who undergo these experiments say that this mushroom trip at the end of their life, facing their own mortality, in no uncertain terms, was actually completely beneficial to them, radically rewired their relationship to their own mortality, made them not only be okay with death, but to openly embrace and accept their own death. And again, because this is playing on consciousness, there's still so many questions to be answered. But in my own experience, in my own life, and I've had, I would say more experience with psychedelics than 99% of people on Earth, right? Because if you actually look at the details, the amount of people that do mushrooms and acid and DMT is actually pretty small globally. And if you're in circles of people that are like psychonauts and they love this stuff, you can sort of lose sight of just how rare these things are for people to actually use in any systemic way. So it is very rare. So I have a lot of personal experience with it. And some of my most profound spiritual revelations are wrapped up in my psychedelic trips. My last one on mushrooms a couple months ago was incredibly profound, to the point where there was moments in the trip where I was openly weeping on the ground out of pure, unbounded love and compassion for all other human beings, thinking about the suffering of other people, strangers, in a way that was so profound to me that it literally brought me to my knees, and I wept. It's not like a tear dribbled down my cheek, but like a hard physical weeping for the suffering of other human beings that I don't even know. And you can wave your hand and say, well, it's just chemicals in your brain, whatever. But no, it's something much, much deeper than that. And the sort of person who can wave their hand and say it's just chemicals in the brain, nothing to see here, are almost always the sort of people who themselves have never engaged with these substances. So what What this means, I don't know. It has something to do with the coevolution of our species and the flora and fauna around us. It's amazing that these things that grow out of the earth, be they DMT, mushrooms, LSD, or anything else, can have these profound effects on us and lasting effects, because after the drug itself and the trip itself goes away, I was still left with this profound sort of moral urgency to help others more, right? To do more. That was the thing that I kept coming up with in my head during that trip. I need to help people more. How can I help them? That month, I ended up, doing it in the sense that I gave hundreds and hundreds of dollars away to on the ground organizations, feeding people, serving the people, etc. And then the next month, after the uprising hit, we gave hundreds and hundreds of dollars away to bail funds to make sure people can get out of jail. And, that's just one way of helping people. But even that seems insufficient still. Months after my trip, I'm still feeling like I need to do even more than that. I need to help people even more and dedicate my life to helping other human beings suffer less. And that dovetails beautifully with the Marxist political project of building a better world. That dovetails beautifully with the Buddhist concept of the illusion of separateness, and that we're all in this together, and that radical compassion is the way toward liberation, de-emphasizing your individual egoic self and replacing it with the other, right? Really what it is absorbing the other into the self, that the self is no longer this myopic, trembling little ego, but it is everything and everyone. And to see somebody else suffer unnecessarily is to feel that suffering almost as if it's your own. And that's profound. And that has a capacity, perhaps, to definitely change individual psychologies. But if you can imagine maybe a future socialist society where psychedelics are brought into the culture in such a way that they can become rites of passages, things that we have a deep cultural, societal respect for and engage with systemically, you could really have profound effects on a culture more broadly. So I don't know the answer to a lot of these mysteries. I don't know where these things will go in the future, but science is catching up, medicine is catching up, and more people are becoming interested in the implications for human consciousness, and I think that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, it's definitely important to underline that these aren't things that should just be taken willy-nilly, just, with no care, no understanding of the deep implications that can come from them. Obviously, they can cause harm, but we're talking about, as you say, taking it in a ritualistic sense, and society should do that rather than criminalising it, as they do now. I can remember, back in the early days when I first started smoking weed, I'd just be like, with smoking, would just be like, oh my God, this just opens your mind up. Like, you can see so much more. You can see how, you can see that if people just smoke weed, everybody would be happy and they'd all get along. And, I really was convinced that obviously capitalism would keep this from us because it would, make us more awoken, I guess, to the absolutely insane, barbaric, feudalistic time in which we live in under capitalist overlords. But yeah, regarding all the work that you do, Brett, and how inspired you were to do so much more, just love and solidarity, especially being, I don't know, it's sad that you've got to be brave to do this, but be brave enough to actually say, I was on my goddamn knees crying, wish I could do more, just thinking about all the goddamn suffering in the world. I mean, anybody who knows me knows it's extremely easy to set me off crying. I swear to God, I mustn't have a single mate who's just not seen me cry, like, no joke, like, as like fucking adult and that, because the world's fucking horrible. There's so many things to be fucking upset about, and this drive to do more is like, there's no amount of ego I could have that could accept and tolerate this. So people with an ego are the ones, all the lads who can't actually express the feelings, and are gonna actually punch your head in if you ever do something to upset their ego. So they're definitely not going to come out and talk about things that are upsetting, because then their egos being offended. A lot of people's livelihoods depend on having a massive ego. So I mean, the point I'm making is it's this being true to yourself to want to do more to help others, that truly makes the world a better place. So yeah, I just want to thank you for obviously your open honesty whenever it comes to, you know, emotions and feelings, because we can't ignore them. We shouldn't ignore them. This is why so many people fucking kill themselves regularly. Do you know what I'm saying? It's this toxic masculinity. But yeah, the point I'm making here is the fact that all of these plants, these compounds that affect us in, you know, really profound ways, you know, psychedelically, these have historically been able to heal the fractured souls, which capitalism has absolutely mined and exploited from us for their own gain. And as Brett said, has actually turned somebody who's going to lose their life into somebody who's made peace with that. So these can heal us psychologically in ways that no medicine can. And it is a goddamn shame that science is so, the materialist conception of science, not the Marxist sense of science, but the capitalist science, says, you know, when it comes to consciousness at least, that we can't measure these things because they can't be held. Like, you can't hold a thought. So capitalist science is saying if you can't measure it, then it's not there. But obviously it is there, because obviously we've got consciousness, and you can't measure that. You can't measure dreams, but yeah, we know that they're there.
I just want to talk a second about how, like, this actually helps solidify the idea of just how strong capitalist realism is, right? So, like, if you think back to the 60s, you get the psychedelic revolution, you get the tune in, drop out, you get the, you know, take them to understand the system and the whole counterculture. And if you fast forward to today, I read an article about how people in Silicon Valley, like tech workers, are microdosing psychedelics so that they can be more productive and so that they can, you know, increase the profit margins of their bosses, right? And it sort of really brings home the idea to me, not only capitalist realism, but the idea Lenin talked about, you know, anything that is remotely revolutionary will be stripped of revolutionary potential and incorporated back into the capitalist system so that it can profit off of it.
Exactly right, and it should be sacrilegious. It should profoundly bother us that these, you know, meditation is a similar thing, right? It gets commodified, it gets stripped of its actual, you know, deep and profound implications, and it becomes just another tool for productivity. So in both cases, you're taking something beautiful with thousands and thousands of years of indigenous significance and ways of life, and you're stripping it of everything meaningful about it, and you're repackaging it as something to make you more productive in the workplace. It's a slap in the face to anybody on earth with a heart and a brain, and those things need to be combated by thoughtful people on the other side of things that says no, meditation and psychedelics and these things are not here for tech bros in Silicon Valley to produce more profit. They're here for radical engagement on a spiritual and existential level for the betterment of not only the individual, but for the entire population, for all sentient beings ultimately. And I think that's really an important part of it. And the one thing I wanted to say, too, is about ego. Capitalism is the centering of the ego. Imperialism is the centering of the ego. It's the domination. It's the putting down. It's the punching somebody's head in, as Shibby said earlier. It's this idea that you need to dominate everybody else, because what the ego really is a manifestation, an overcompensation of deep trembling insecurity. The underbelly of ego is always insecurity. The people that want to put their ego forward, that want to convince you that they're the coolest, strongest, sexiest person alive, that need to go out of their way to try to tell you that, are the sort of people that are inside trembling little babies that don't know themselves and are insecure about themselves. And so they need to project and they need to overcompensate. And when you blow that up to a societal or civilizational scale, you get something like capitalism, imperialism. You get something like European colonialism. And so when we talk about the ego, sometimes I'll have crude Marxists reach out and say, this is not important. You know, you're talking about individual psychology, and get all that out of my face. We need to talk about the materialist conditions and the means of production and how to change them. But this is a betrayal of dialectics. This is a refusal to see the interconnectivity of all of these things. And, you know, if we're going to have an outward revolution, there needs to be changes to our paradigm, changes to the way we relate to one another at the same time. A revolution isn't just an outward objective thing. It's also a dialectically inward, implicit thing. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. And specifically the idea that wherever there is ego, it's always undergirded and produced by a deep-seated insecurity that the ego is trying to compensate for.
Thank you. God damn, that was so well said, Brett. As always, I proper love how you articulate the ego. It's again spot on. It's something people need to realise. People don't even know what a goddamn ego is for the most part, but you've just explained it perfectly. And it's obviously one of the biggest goddamn problems in society. It is, you know, as you explained, it's capitalism. On this inward struggle which you talked about, you said that there's an outward struggle and an inward struggle with a revolution, but yet there's also the outward struggle and the inward struggle of capitalism, and that is the individual, and then that is the broader sense of everybody competing as individuals in markets and whatnot. But yeah, well said. And yeah, Ryan, also well said. You're talking about anything that is revolutionary is stripped of its revolutionary potential. And yeah, you could say that absolutely when it comes to psychedelics and these drugs which were being talked about. That's actually, well, like, so true. I'll also just give an example of how the state actually done that. Well, an actual scumbag who was a former Nixon policy advisor, that's an actual presidential policy advisor, said, "You want to know what all this is really about?" He asked with the bluntness of a man who, after public disgrace and the stretch of federal prison, had little left to protect. He said the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. Said, you know what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, you know, obviously after they flooded heroin in these communities, and then criminalising both heavily, marijuana and being against, you know, the drug war, then we could disrupt these communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. That's a policy advisor. He's come out and said this. How fucking disgusting is that? That's why people are getting arrested. That's why drugs are illegal. It's just something from the Nixon campaign in 1968.
Yeah, well, 100%. That was the beginning of the drug war here in the U.S. The Nixon administration, ramped up by the Reagan administration, and really ramped up, which doesn't get talked about a lot, by the Clinton administration. And what the product of that was, it's not only clear, racist police brutality in poor communities of color and all of the other shit that goes along with it, the infiltration of left-wing groups, COINTELPRO, etc. But it's also the basis of the incarceration system here in the U.S. The United States has about 4 to 5% of the world's population, but 25% of its prisoners. That is a profound statistic, a profound reality. The very nation who tells the rest of the world that it is the beacon of liberty and freedom has more people in cages per capita and in overall terms than any other society on planet Earth. And if that's not a profound hypocrisy at the heart of capitalism, I don't know what is. But you're exactly right. It started out as an attack on the left and on communities of color, and it goes way back, even before that, to immigrants and the first marijuana laws here in the U.S. It's always been racially coded, and still to this day is incredibly deeply racially coded, and it evolves, but it never stops. So you have the early heroin and the psychedelics, but then it shifted into crack cocaine and regular cocaine, and then it just now used as a pretext to pull people over, plant drugs on them, and then once you do that, you can brutalize them, you can do anything you want to them, you can lock them in a cage for having a plant that grows out of the fucking earth. This system is rotten, and what the counterculture didn't get right was the idea that you could have a counterculture without challenging the underlying system that produces this rotten culture. And so what happened after the 60s is that all these hippies, they just resorted back into their individual lives. They recoiled back into their individual lives and became the next generation of oppressors. They're the boomers today. They're the 60 and 70-year-olds in Congress today. And so what the counterculture of the 60s, for whatever its successes and failures may have been, it's also a deep lesson on the idea that if you want to take these ideas about psychedelics and all this stuff and the possible emancipatory power of them seriously, it needs to go hand in hand with a political confrontation with the underlying system of capitalism. There needs to be a rupture from the underlying system before we can treat any of the symptoms of the underlying disease.
Yeah, this liberal capitalism being the disease, and obviously socialism being the cure to poor people being locked up in cages, as you said. You know, I just there's so many drugs in my city. It's a port city, so you know there's a river there. It's historically been, you know, big on crime because there's always so much fucking poverty and people trying to make ends meet out here, you know. And if you look outside of central London, or even in central London, just not in the rich parts, there's crime everywhere. There's council estates, housing estates, and then you've got what the fuck do you call them? Basically the projects in London, and you've got people hustling out there with no other option because, I mean, they're raised in these communities that have been flooded by drugs from bourgeoisie, the capitalists, not from goddamn poor people. How the fuck are they bringing in drugs from, you know, elsewhere, from all over the world? Obviously they're not. So obviously there's the lumpen capitalist, there's a lumpen petty bourgeoisie as well. But if you just want to look at an actual example in how the bourgeoisie are still flooding these communities to this goddamn day with drugs, I'll give you one. In 2009, US customs officials seized a container ship financed by JP Morgan, one of the world's largest banks, this week, after authorities found nearly 18 tons of cocaine with an estimated street value of $1.3 billion in the vessel. Oh my days, fam. The sheer quantity of cocaine, roughly 39,500 pounds. This is still going on today. Is a proletarian owning and commanding a ship like this? No. But are our people, our proletarians, going to be arrested and thrown into jail, having to have a fucking blade shoved up the bum in case anybody jumps in the cell and tries to stab them to death, trying to survive in jail? Yes, they will. They've set up poor communities to go to jail.
And then they make money on the private prisons on the other end. So, you know, they bring in the drugs or whatever. They make money off that. They pharmaceuticalize and patent other drugs and make money off that. And then they make money off the private prisons when you pump millions of fucking people into those cages. And then that's another source of profit. So on every level of this problem, you see the profiteers being the parasitic cause and effect of this rotten system. And it needs to be toppled. There's no other way out. There's no reforming this violent, disgusting, genocidal death machine we know as global capitalism. And the more people that realize it, the better. And the quicker we realize it, the better, because with the climate chaos hanging over our heads like a noose, time is running out. We need to get these ideas out to more and more people, and more people need to be willing to dedicate their lives to building a better world before the clock runs out on us.
I was going to say, I think that's actually a good introduction to ask you whether you are, ultimately optimistic on the future of humanity, because, like you said, there's plenty of things to be depressed about. You can, flip on the news, and there's no shortage of things from nuclear war to the ongoing climate emergency to be depressed about.
Yeah. Well, I would answer that, sort of going full circle dialectically. Wherever there is oppression, wherever there's domination, wherever there's violent depravity, colonialism, capitalism, plundering, etc., you also inherently give rise to those who fight it. The more the earth is destroyed, the more environmentalists you create. Marx talked about capitalism producing its own gravediggers. And as the capitalist system spirals the death drain more and more people have no choice but to see the system for what it is and wake up. Here in the U.S., we're having this unprecedented multiracial uprising right now in every major city and even little towns across this country of people of all colors standing up, defending Black lives, but also making these systemic critiques of the overall system, knowing full well that this system has robbed most of us, my age and younger, of our future. We don't have a future. And when capitalism is let unfettered, it robs everybody of their future, and people aren't stupid. People know it. And so am I optimistic? I'm cautiously optimistic because I understand the dialectical process. The more depraved the system gets, the more people wake up to the depravity of the system and are willing to fight it. And we're seeing that process play out globally. And we saw in the last 10 years this rise of right-wing neo-fascist quote-unquote populism the world over, in your country, in our country, in the Philippines, in Brazil, in Hungary, all over the world. What I'm hoping is that this is the last sort of major global gasp of this system, and this next generation coming up are fed up, and they know that there's no future for them. They're going to work. If we keep the system in place, we're just going to watch the world die around us while we get paid $10 a goddamn hour and work until we're 75 and die on the job and the assembly line. People don't want that future. The capitalism's created the context in which people are saying enough is enough, and more people are saying it every single day. So that's what gives me optimism. It's a revolutionary optimism. It's a belief in the masses, a belief in the people, that you can only push people so far before people say no more. And I think we're seeing more and more people putting up the middle finger to the system and saying no more. And I think that's only going to increase in the face of continued climate catastrophe, in the face of continued unnecessary imperial slaughter, in the face of just brutal grinding inequality in your country, in my country, and countries all over the world. And so that's that dialectical process of being oppressed and then fighting up against your oppressor. And the more intense they try to restrain it and stamp it down, the more vigorous the other side becomes. And so yeah, that dialectical process does give me some optimism, and I think it should give all of us optimism, but also responsibility, because the important thing here is that it's not a passive process. History doesn't happen to us, it happens through us. We are the mechanisms by which history is made. And so it's not enough to say, well, the dialectical process will play out. I'll just go play Call of Duty and recoil into my individual life, because then it won't. The oppressors are organized, they're funded, they're militant, they're ready to fight and die for their broken system. And we have to meet them with that level of organization, discipline, funding, and militancy in order to oppose them in enough time to save our futures. So as scary as things are going to get in the next couple of decades, it's a necessary process that needs to play out. And ultimately, I believe there's more people in this world that want to see a better, different way of life than there are people who are deeply invested in this rotten system. And so that does give me some hope.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the answer that Antonio Gramsci gave when asked the same thing, right? I'm a pessimist of the intellect, but an optimist of will.
Beautiful. Exactly right.
So, Angela Davis, optimism is a political act. You have to act as if it was possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all of the time. So true. It's a struggle. God damn it. It's heartbreaking. The more you learn about the world, the tougher it is on your soul. But you have to call your boss bourgeoisie, Mr. Bourgeoisie. You've got to tell your workers he's a bourgeoisie. We're workers. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you've got to do a bit of theory at least, just to have a basic grasp on our position in the world. And then again, just even reading some of the history or listening to podcasts that hear about revolutionary struggles and history and successes, that gives you optimism anyway. But even if you're not optimistic, we've still got to do the struggle, because Brett said we're the mechanisms of history being played. If we don't do something, it never gets done. I mean, you can't sit on Call of Duty, nothing's going to change. You've got to go out, you've got to speak like this to people out there. Do a podcast, just speak your own thoughts. So my earlier episodes, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I just knew that it's important to speak and be vocalized, and then, you know, get guests on. We'll come on your podcast. You know, I'm sure other people will come on your podcast. We can go through these things together. So, I mean, it might not be being out there organising, because you might not have anybody to organise with. You might not be any comrades close by. So this is one tool in which you can be a part of history being played. You can have people listening, hearing your struggle, empathising, and doing that political act to at least have some optimism to inspire it in others. It's a struggle. We're there for you. We're your comrades. We love you. Use your voice. God damn it, every single voice is important. You're going to refine your speech. You're going to refine your ideas, and that will make you an asset to the struggle. Let's move on now. Let's have a discussion that I'm so excited to talk about now. So, you know, as James Colony said, the Irish people will only be free when they own everything from the plough to the stars. Solidarity to the Irish, goddamn. But I mean, people in general are only going to be free when they own everything from the plough to the stars. Let's talk about the stars. We've talked about the light from the Big Bang hitting Earth, forming life. So, I mean, yes, we did emerge from the earth, you know, animals, plant life. Let's look at beyond that now. Because whether we like it or not, NASA has a mission, Space 2024, to a mission to the moon and Mars within the next 10 years of our lifetime. They're going to be establishing a permanent base on the moon. They're going to go to Mars. They're going to have man on Mars. I personally can't wait to see HD footage of man and woman on Mars. But to you, Bretta, have you heard about this? And what does this to you say for the future of capitalism? Is this step to establish a permanent base on the moon and go out to Mars, is that something positive for mankind? Or is it simply, like as Franz Fanon would say, is it a bourgeois prestige work? Or is it even just simply US space imperialism?
I think it is. And this is where we get down to, you know, systemic things that undergird things that could be good or bad, right? So there's a version of this that could be good, and it's sort of the Star Trekian version of transcending the need for the amassing of wealth for its own sake, and then going out into the cosmos with a genuine and sole goal of exploration for its own sake, of learning, of connecting, of seeing if there's other life forms out there, of learning more about our own place in the cosmos, right?
That's what all this is about. A lot has changed in the past 300 years. People are no longer obsessed with the accumulation of things. We have eliminated hunger, want, the need for possessions. We've grown out of our infancy.
You've got it all wrong. It has never been about possessions. It's about power.
Power to do what?
To control your life, your destiny.
That kind of control is an illusion.
Then what will happen to us? There's no trace of my money. My office is gone. What will I do? How will I live?
This is the 24th century. Material needs no longer exist.
Then what's the challenge?
The challenge, Mr. Offenhouse, is to improve yourself. To enrich yourself. Enjoy it.
So you can imagine a socialist or communist future world where space exploration and even bases on Mars are an intrinsic part of just human self-actualization, of figuring out where we fit in the cosmos for its own sake. But under capitalist imperialist paradigm, under the paradigm we see now, what it really is an extension of colonialist logic, of a new frontier to dominate, of new commodities out in space to plunder and exploit for profit. You know, you can see this in the show, the sci-fi show The Expanse, where it really gives a capitalist future, where the space exploration is for ultimate class society ends. The hierarchy of class society, of racism, of imperialism, of different types of people, the belters, those who live out on the asteroid belt versus the people on Earth versus the people on Mars. They begin to divide and separate each other, almost like along, what would be today racial lines or ethnic lines, but the capitalist logic always finds ways to divide and separate and conquer. And so it depends under system that this happens. And under the current system with the Elon Musks of the world and the overall capitalist extractive project still ongoing, this is either an expansion of the colonialist sort of mindset and or a sort of fever dream that we can use up everything on Earth. We can destroy the forests and the Amazon and shit in our own nest, and then when that's completely sort of despoiled, we can fly off and terraform Mars and create a new Earth and start the process all over again. This is the psychopathic logic at the center of the capitalist and colonialist imperialist system. So under that context, this can only be a bad thing. This can only be another iteration, a new frontier for domination and plundering. But under a different context, if we can manage to make this revolutionary rupture from this system and move towards a better world, it can be something that's truly beautiful. It can be the expansion of the human future. It could be humanity existing for millions of more generations, each one building off the knowledge of the last and pushing our species further into the cosmos with the underlying urge not to profit and plunder and exploit and dominate, but to learn, to grow, to make connections with other life forms in the galaxy. And that can be a beautiful thing. So again, this is why systemic understanding is essential. The way libertarians and liberals and defenders of the system talk about it, it can become very much a sort of apocalyptic, dystopian future idea. But under the right conditions, it could be a beautiful expansion of the human project. So yeah, it depends.
Absolutely. I think that's actually what most people miss about technology or even institutions generally, right? That there's no such thing as an institution devoid of class interest, right? So long as you have a bourgeois, technology will be used to meet their ends, right? I mean, when television was first created, there were no adverts on it. And then over time, the moneyed interests roll in and they cut it up, and before and in the middle and after of shows, you have to have adverts now. And this is the same thing that's happened with technology. I mean, under a class society, technology will be used to benefit the class interests. I mean, you can see that in the way that technology is used now. I mean, how is it used? It's used to surveil us. It's used to track us. It's used to sell us things. I mean, yeah, I mean, definitely under a non-class society, technology will be freed up to be used in other ways for the benefit of people instead of for the benefit of the bourgeois, for sure.
I would love it to, me personally, I believe all of humanity should come together again in my ideal communist world. I would fully say, okay, the Lake District, every single human being on the planet, I don't care where you're from, what you're doing, anything like that. If you want to build a spaceship, go to the Lake District. I don't care how long it takes us, but everybody's going to get the necessary education to being able to facilitate this construction of a spaceship so that we can go to Mars and space and whatsoever. To me, that's important. I think it's absolutely essential to go to space, because I do believe if we're not creating the conditions for our species to survive throughout the course of the universe's life, I just think that's like pointless. Do you know what I'm saying? I think that we exist to reproduce and carry on the universe's ability to be conscious. I believe that, without us, the universe doesn't know that it exists. I also kind of feel like we're definitely basically sperm to be fertilized on an egg that happens to be another planet or a moon. We can 100% go there and then make them fertile, or you could see it simply as pollen blowing off one leaf onto another. I mean, this is obvious in nature. We're a part of nature, as we keep saying. This is literally what it's meant to be. It's like kind of
Schrodinger's cat.
Yeah, it's like the universe needs a conscious observer, or the universe just isn't there. And again, that, I mean, there's no way to measure it, but again, that that could just be like a materialist conception, using modern science. Yeah, I mean, we should have spaceships, we should be going to Mars, we should try and preserve our life and life on Earth, because as we heard from the intro, life is a miracle. We don't know if it exists elsewhere. I think we should definitely go out there and travel and explore it. I don't care how long it takes us. There's no evolution, there's no natural selection. We're all in houses, we're not being killed off by nature. I mean, I think evolution is stunted for humanity. I do think that we should continue to bound through space and time, and as technology evolves with earlier humans who are traveling through space and time, maybe like Mars would be the first step. I do believe that, even if we're not technically Homo sapiens, this is kind of a touchy subject, because you do hear them say, well, that just foments racism because you're saying that humans are different. I don't think that matters whatsoever. Again, I mean, we're obviously in favour of plants, of animals, of humanity. I'm going to be in favour of not even a next step, but just a variant of the sapien overall. And I mean, it sounds again absolutely far-fetched and absolutely mad, but if you're not thinking about these things in serious terms, we're just going to be hit. I mean, imagine the day that we defeat the capitalists, we've got international global solidarity, and then we get hit by an asteroid and all become extinct anyway. What was the point?
Yeah, goddamn, yeah.
So yeah, we absolutely have to exist on other bodies throughout space, and otherwise we are just going to be hit by an asteroid, a volcano, nuclear annihilation, a goddamn super corona. So many things that can wipe us out on this Earth. If we don't exist outside of Earth, then we're fucking failing. Basically, we can't truly protect ourselves and the people if we're just living on one rock in space. But I mean, what comes from this? Because there's other people out there who don't even agree with this, but what comes from it? Well, look at what came from the Apollo program. We've got so many technologies nowadays that have improved life everywhere. The technology that comes from it is absolutely insane. I can't think of none of them off the top of my head, but even missile technology that's being developed. We can use those same missiles to literally shoot food at hungry people all around the world. If people need certain equipment, no matter where they are, we just load a payload on top of a missile and shoot it at them. It's that simple. We can use these technologies that, as Ryan said, they only produce when it means to serve the capitalists. But there's going to be no communist manifesto on the moon. NASA are not taking a communist manifesto to Mars. It's not going to be on Elon Musk's ship. It's definitely not going to be on Jeff Bezos' spaceship. There's going to be no communists outside of Mars, and all that's going to happen is they're just going to eventually have a colony outside of the Earth and then invade us all for our own resources or what, because that's what happened when humans left Africa. If we don't have this global consciousness in which we are all on the same page, if we all resonate with each other, you start off by reading goddamn Marx, because then you know what Marx said, and then we don't have to debate with each other stupid shit because we're all on the same page. You get me? So it has to be done. We have to go to space. We also have to take power from the capitalists, or the capitalists are just going to fuck us over both on Earth and in space. We should build a goddamn spaceship, and I'm telling you, we should build a spaceship. We should all have electric bikes so we can all get around rapid, and that's when we talk about this change within us as individuals and on a global scale. We can all have these small vehicles to get about, but these should also be like spaceships to get about as well. And the first task for our spaceship, besides obviously developing the technologies such as life support systems, recycling food, water, energy, all of this, again, by thorium, our first mission should be to clear up the space junk around the Earth, because at the moment we're all going to be locked in the Earth like a goddamn prison, and the only people who can ever escape the Earth, even if we had all the money and power in the world, are these capitalist space agencies, because they're the ones tracking all the space debris that they've littered all around the Earth. Go and Google space junk. It's absolutely disgusting. So yeah, that would be the first mission: clean up all the space junk, shoot food to hungry people. All of these things that we absolutely have to be talking to each other about. It's only so good to goddamn to discuss the Soviet Union. Let's fucking move past this. It's in the past. Let's start towards looking at the future. Let's plan the future. Let's get all these fucking astrophysicists hyped over how much they're going to be able to look at the stars. The people own the means of production. Let's invite these goddamn neuroscientists. Name one neuroscientist right now who's a goddamn communist. You can't. I'm the closest thing to it. B-Dog, Breht, and my man Ryan. So, you know, we need these on board to look at how mirror neurons work, how, you know, neuroplasticity affects us under capitalism. So it's not just theory, but we can actually see the practical results, which these capitalist scientists love so much. So, I mean, yeah, I hope there was some stuff there that resonated with you. I really thought that you found this interesting. We would absolutely 1,000,000% love to hear your thoughts, good or bad. Rate us 5 stars on iTunes, only 5 stars, because again, as I've mentioned earlier, I'm dead easy to upset and I will start crying. But overall, the point is, Marxism is the science of revolution. Historical materialism shows us how history develops. It's not the be-all and end-all. We use Marxism to break out of capitalism. That's as simple as it is. If there's no longer capitalism, we don't need Marxism, but we still need to plan a future beyond it. This is one way in which I hope interested some people. Have you got any thoughts on that, Brett?
I mean, yeah, there's so much there. I just touch on a couple points, and then I do have to get going because I have a family thing in a little bit. But I do want to touch on a couple points that you said. One is the idea of human evolution and how that might already is changing, or how that might even change in the future during space exploration. And I think one way to think about it is that human beings have almost transcended evolution in the way that other animals haven't, right? The natural limitations that check evolution, right? Natural selection. In a lot of ways, we've flown the coop on that. Like we've gotten beyond the immediate natural pressures in a lot of ways because of our technology and civilizational advances. And, you know, one of the things that separates human beings from a lot of other animals is our conscious creativity, right? Our life activity, our ability to go out, work on the world, and create totally new things. And so in some sense, I think that the future of human evolution is going to be taken over by humans themselves. It's like we've developed the intelligence and the understanding of the evolutionary process that we can take conscious control over our own evolution. And that might look like, and this could be, you know, utopian or dystopian, depending on a lot of other variables, of course, but it might look like a slow merging with our own technology, you know, nanobots to boost the immune system and clear out toxins, you know, bionic limbs or organs, like for the blind to see, things that, you know, we could put into our bodies that make us extend our 5 senses to something beyond just those 5 senses, right? So I think when we're talking about human evolution, it might very well be in the context of humans taking control over our own evolution. And that, of course, as I said, can be utopian or dystopian. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on is your idea of in a post-class society, in a communist future society, that Marxism will no longer be needed. And I think that's a really important point. Marxists literally want to get to the point where we don't need Marxism anymore. And there's an interesting echo in Buddhism, where the Buddha talks about the Buddhist practice and the religion and the philosophy and the psychology of Buddhism being a raft. And you get on the raft and you use the raft to cross the river, right? And on the other side is enlightenment, to be crude about it. But once you're enlightened, once you become enlightened in the Buddhist sense, you discard the raft, right? You don't get to the other side of the river and pick the raft up and keep carrying it over land. You let go of it because it's served its purpose and now it can be jettisoned. And that's the exact same thing with Marxism. That's how I think of myself as a Marxist. I'm a Marxist because I'm in this historical process that needs to be fulfilled, and Marxism is the mechanism by which we can fulfill it and move beyond class society. And I want to get to a point where I no longer have to be a Marxist. Eventually you end your own philosophical outlook because the need for it has been transcended. And there's something beautiful in that. You know, it's like you don't get that in other political philosophies. All other political philosophies see themselves as existing in perpetuity, as an ongoing thing. But as dialectical materialists, we want to get to a point where even the Marxist Marxist project itself is really completed, and so there's no more need for it. And so those are just interesting ways, I think, to think about a couple of the things that you mentioned. And like I said, I can't get to everything you said, but all of what you said is really interesting to dive deep on and think of the implications of, and we need to start having that future-oriented vision of what humanity could look like, and busting people out of, as Ryan said earlier, the capitalist realism that acts as a containment on our political imagination.
Thank you so much for your contribution and your time, Brett. It's hugely appreciated. It's been an absolutely incredible experience. Before we let you go, is there any plugs that you'd like to put in? You know, where can people find you? Where can they find your work, etc.?
Yeah, first and foremost, I'll just say thank you both so much for having me on. This has been a fascinating, lovely conversation and experience, and I'll walk away with it continuing to think about the stuff that we talked about. I'm really humbled and honored that you brought me on your show to have this conversation, and I'll release it on my feed as well so that my listeners can learn about your show and come and support it, so we have a two-way traffic to each other's shows, and I think that's a sort of solidarity that we can show to one another. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I'm deeply appreciative. If you're at all interested in my projects, you just have to go to revolutionaryleftradio.com. It shows both our podcasts, our Patreon, our YouTube page, etc. So that's where you can find me.
Yes, people, 1,000,000% go and listen to Rev Left Radio. Go into Red Menace, that's where you get all your theory. So interesting. I mean, it's literally one of the greatest gifts to humanity right now. Ryan, would you like to say goodbye?
Yeah, absolutely. Just that I, can't thank you enough. You talk about how humbling it is for you, but I kind of feel like we have much more reason to feel that way, and it's definitely an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Love and solidarity to both of you. And yeah, when you're done with this, just send it over, and I'll release it on my RSS feed too, because I think this is a conversation that a lot of people will get a lot out of.
Wowza, yeah. We also hope that people get a lot out of it. But for now, until next time, workers and lumpen of the world, unite.
Born in a competition with a feeling that something's missing. Bred in a corn addiction with a synthetic composition. On the brink of a civil war or the forming of one religion. I wonder what came first, dinosaurs or Darwinism? Pledging allegiance to a flag since elementary. Writing curses and casting spells, stung by the spelling bee. And they say, congratulations, you graduated. From slavery to paid slavery, you actually made it. Here, take this gown and cap and wave it. Like a celebration of going to school just to get a job to pay for it. Like a nation that traded its minerals in exchange for paper payment. Here, these are your gods, you have to praise them. I wonder who we worship if we weren't captured and traded. Consider this my affidavit. Yeah, it's the ruling class here to rule your ass. Prescription drug thug, cocaine, you your ass. Agricultural skills sure would suit your ass. But they say, living off the land is a useless past. Here, work for dead presidents. Food your ass. Any revolutionaries, they remove your ass. Fast, click, clack, quick blast, in a flash. Whiplash from the kickback or the impact. Push the shit back. As long as my head is intact, I be as political as I want, cause I get taxed. Nah, this ain't no fucking diss track. The diss track, a useless chit chat and syntax on whose ass is this fat and who has a six pack. Who's batting this average? Compare his passes to his passes. It's 1,000 sports channels. You can get this package or this package. Who's this savage? Hey, let's compare your emotional baggage to my emotional baggage to see who calls each other bitch fastest. Haters go out their way to fuck up my day, but I ain't even worried about your bitch asses. And it's quite the optic, hard to take your eyes off it. They make the sky toxic, prescribe the antibiotic. Make a high profit, divide the margin. You could die off it, if you do, they hide the autopsy. What the fuck are you supposed to do? More gallons in your kosher food. What the fuck is even kosher food? Third generation crops won't produce. Be careful who you keep close to you. I'm from Atlanta, but shouts out to my Oakland crew. They say Bobby Ray the older you is overdue. I say, hey, sorry, I got a little caught up exposing truths. I used to think, what will Hova do? Now I think, what the fuck will Macho Man and Hulk Hogan do? Now if Steve Austin was America and Iraq was Afghanistan, then Russia and China would be Triple H and Illuminati would be Vince McMahon. Now when the haters are the Undertaker, the crowd doesn't stand a chance when the international bankers are walking through the stands. Slide your ass some Zan. You think you a fan, but you really just a lamb. Niggas start trends every day, but don't ever get no pair of Vans. What the fuck is in advance? Niggas live on colored people time. What the fuck is in advance? I don't fucking understand. I just want my fucking bands. I'm a walking, talking human conundrum, like a Muslim going ham, looking for the promised land. False stories of Christopher Columbus holding Pocahontas' hand. Black history is the shortest month. I just hope you understand when the native Indians don't get shit, but Thanksgiving and some yams like, here's a few casinos. Sorry we took all your land. Well, let's just move on because America's great. Man, I fucking love it. Democratic or Republic, lightning rod, change the subject. All of these religions, I'm glad I found one. All of these beliefs, and mine's the right one. Trying to process all of this info you hide from, till you wake the fuck up, I don't need advice, son. Culture and religion condition your mind, hun. Whatever's prohibited, I'ma defy them. The smell of freedom is making my eyes run. To authority, I'm the antithesis. I'm not a pacifist or a philanthropist. And I ain't got all the answers. I just got a louder mic and better stances, bitch. Oh, I'm sorry, did I offend you? What the fuck you think goes on in schools you send your kids to? What the fuck you think they serve for lunch? What's on the menu? That's my only ratchet shit is what these kids is into. A language comprehensible. Friends do what they friends do. People act so fucking hard, but really they just gentle. Psychological children. Grown-ups with issues. Grown-ups with children who grow up with issues. Cancer tissues, abandonment, misuse, subliminal marketing, screaming, here, let me fix you. I have the cure. I have the remedy. I am the savior. I am not the enemy. But give me your money, give me your money, give me your money. Everybody's in debt, but this is a free country. They dock your pay, what a mockery. Why you on the clock? Hickory, dickory, dockery. They want cable, they want coffee, they want comedy. Anything to take their mind off being property. Trying to say it properly, working on my tact, but I am the anomaly. They know I'm the shit like a colonoscopy. They know I'm the shit by just looking at my discography. They know I've been sent to awaken this idiocracy. Mass media, hypocrisy, turn you to a worker bee, harvest the honey tree. I'm just being honest, B.